So, Paddy, last time we were together, we were at a birthday party of sorts.
Yes, 5th year commemoration of the Newscast Daily edition.
Do you think we'll get our own party when it's some anniversary spuriously of the weekend editions?
Well, I think we're into a year and a half of it. But anyway, we did have a newscaster, which is always keeps us honest, Aenir, who's in Cardiff, saying, "Congratulations on the celebration. I think I've listened to every episode since the first Brexit cast, mostly while swimming."
That's impressive. I have been trying to find the celebration programme on Sounds and iPlayer and failed. Oh dear, we're so sorry. Can you tell me where to find it? Well, there is a link to the iPlayer version in the episode description on Sounds if you want to watch it in full.
And now we'll get on with Saturday's newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio, and we will reveal a guest in Ukraine in a moment because newscasters will remember one of the promises made by candidate Donald Trump was that he would end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of being inaugurated, which he didn't.
Newsflash, it hasn't happened. But he did over time start to kind of modulate that. He then suggested maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 100 days. But it certainly feels like the moment of the grand reveal for what his plan actually is might be imminent. And there have been leaks suggesting that he might come out with this plan, even though his deputy, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, will be there, not him himself, at the Munich Security Conference, which is a huge, big event focusing on defence and important international affairs that's coming up this week.
On Friday. And in the way these things are rolled out, I like the phrase the grand reveal. People leak things. They roll the pitch for ideas in advance of big set pieces. So it would be very normal, newscasters, to see ideas being floated, which were at the extreme end of possibilities, because world leaders are gathering to talk about a possible peace deal for Ukraine with Russia, United States and Ukraine all involved. So that's why we're going to turn to our expert witness, who is even now shivering in the cold for us, friend of the podcast, James Waterhouse.
So, James, you've been the Ukraine correspondent now there for quite some time through the whole of this conflict, so you really know this in and out. What do we know about the hints and nudges about Donald Trump's plan so far? And there on the ground in the region, how seriously are people taking it?
Hi, Laura and Paddy. The best barometer here is the people you speak to and President Zelensky himself. And on the latter, it's the first time we've seen him embrace the fact that American, therefore Western help for Ukraine, has moved from a moral argument to a transactional one. He's given a whole host of interviews over the past week where he sat there with a big map pointing out all of his country's natural resources, critical minerals that he used to make circuit boards and weapons. And he is saying to America, to Donald Trump, look, you can have a slice of this as long as you keep helping us out militarily. So we are seeing President Zelensky engage in the deal. He's also saying that the next few weeks are going to be intensive in a diplomatic sense. It's the first time I've heard him say that. So all of these kind of time pressures that the White House is putting on solving this war seems to be reaching the presidential palace in Kyiv. But as for the detail, I think there are a whole flurry of things going around. You've got Ukraine seeking its own guarantees in terms of NATO membership, which is still a bleak prospect, in terms of foreign troops being on the snowy ground here to police any kind of demilitarized zone of frozen conflict, and for longer-term economic support. And at the moment, there's no sign that Ukraine is going to get what it wants to be propped up when this war is frozen. As for Russia, there is a tangible benefit, you feel, that it will be able to keep hold of what it has taken. Those atrocities that we saw in 2022 and beyond, where cities were encircled, bombarded, when children were killed while playing football, where people were drinking out of radiators to stay alive as Russian forces moved in. It seems as that Moscow will be rewarded for the full-scale invasion it has sustained. And as for the conversation itself, we've got this kind of diplomatic triangle, haven't we? And all the talk is about Trump and Putin of Russia. And President Zelensky is trying to get sharp-elbowed and keep himself at the table as well.
And James, if people are listening rather than watching, what they won't be able to see is that there's a bit of a rustling, I think, because of your big, sensible, warm jacket and your gloves that you are wearing. So that's the sort of mysterious rustling. Quite right for you to be wrapped up, but people can probably hear a bit of that in their earphones. So if they're bemused, then I should just say I think that's what it is.
I don't.
Sorry about that.
No, don't. I don't. I'm surprised you're not wearing more, to be perfectly honest. Newscasters will also have heard, if we're dealing with what newscasters have heard, will have heard us say time and time again, most wars end round a table with a map and the key players. So the questions you ask is, where is the table, who's at the table, and what does the map look like? That's the lesson of history, and we've tested that view. It sounds flippant. We've tested that view with the best experts, all of ours and all of the independent journalists, and that is how wars end.
And if you go back maybe 6 months ago, was it, when we spoke to Jens Stoltenberg, just as he was preparing to leave NATO, and one of the things that he just said so gently is he did use, I think, the word compromise. Now, he didn't say, I'm going to tell Ukraine what to do, but it was one of the first moments when you actually had a Western leader hinting, actually, that Zelensky may have to move back from his initial thing, which was always, I will not give an inch. This was a hostile, illegal invasion. There is no way at all that I will allow any of Russia's land grabs to stand. But, James, does that feel realistic now?
No. It is here in Dnipro, Laura, where it was hoped Ukraine would mount a counter-offensive. Before that, it was a hub for refugees displaced by the shock and awe of Russia's full-scale invasion. Now, I mean, we've been around the Zaporizhia region south of here, where the front line runs over land and water, or a dried-out river now because of the destruction of a dam. And it has been the same story for 3 years. There is heavy artillery on the horizon. Both sides have heavily dug in, fortified their positions. And I think Ukraine's counteroffensive, I was in the first village that was liberated. It was a more of a hamlet reduced to rubble. And the Russians were still in 3 directions on the outskirts of this village. And they had liberated 3 kilometres out of 70 more, going all the way to the Sea of Azov further south, and they haven't really gone any further. The story in the east is even worse for Ukraine, in that the Kremlin is trying to max out. It is continuing with its attritional tactics of launching wave after wave of attack with small units of men, sometimes on mopeds, sometimes on quad bikes, to overwhelm, eventually undermanned Ukrainian positions to try and take more and more Ukrainian soil. They might not have taken a major town yet, like Dnipro where I am, but they're now starting to target major motorways and supply routes, which is leading to more territory falling at a faster rate. So, you are not hearing now the idea of complete liberation, 1991 borders. And I think, as you say, if we're hearing it on the political stage, the devil really will now be in the detail, and the focus shifts once again to the political stage rather than the grinding fighting that's taking place on this frozen ground.
And when I look at the map, it's a large swathe of the east of Ukraine, all the way down to Crimea, which Vladimir Putin already annexed nearly a decade ago. But we make it sound as though he's won. It's thought at least 800,000 people from Russia have been killed or wounded. The economy is hobbled. He's a pariah. And inevitably, that is something that if you are doing a deal, you push on those weak points. And it's wrong, James, to suggest that Putin will be gifted a great prize. He's going to have to give something up as well if it is a deal.
But it's hard to imagine Vladimir Putin giving something up, showing any signs of a reverse gear, because he hasn't to this point. And I think if you look at some of these leaks ahead of Donald Trump's peace vision, such as America still sending military support, such as allowing Russia to keep hold of what it's taken in terms of it being even recognised on the global stage, and not even being not allowing Ukraine to challenge it on the battlefield later on. From here, it does look like a tangible return for Russia, because it's about concrete outcomes. And if you have, we're talking about maps a lot, aren't we?
Yeah.
If you have Russia controlling continuing to control and occupy Crimea, and the best part of 4 Ukrainian provinces say, then that is more tangible, that is easier to recognise than what Ukraine gets. However, we are talking about President Zelensky, who stayed when many expected he would be killed in the first few days of the invasion. He turned down offers to leave, and the very fact that Ukraine is able to at least see a negotiation around its future, the level of its involvement is still to be decided, that is quite something 3 years on, when many expected that Russia would take the whole of the country, install a puppet government, and it would be unlikely that I could stand here and talk to you.
And on that, I saw one of the reports in the papers, and again, we began by saying balloons are floated.
Yes.
That there'll be a phone call between Presidents Putin and Zelensky. Are you hearing anything about that?
We've heard from Zelensky's side that he expects to meet with Donald Trump. We don't know whether that's on the phone or in the US. President Trump himself was asked in the White House, is there a meeting happening? He said, I expect so. He was asked whether it would be in Washington. He said, probably. I'm not going there, in relation to Kyiv, which again is a worrying symptom for President Zelensky, if Donald Trump is already ruling out not just a visit to the Munich Security Conference, but also Ukraine itself. And it feels like what's more likely to happen is that he will visit Moscow, Red Square, before he will engage in Ukraine. And it really does feel like this is a White House really trying to engage with Russia and its own interests in trying to form some kind of peace deal.
And James, perhaps also it's interesting just to try to understand where public opinion is in Ukraine. Now, you can never generalise, and it's daft always to think that people all think the same thing in the same country. But as you suggest, it is in a way remarkable on paper with where we started 3 years ago. Ukraine is still a sovereign country. They have managed to hold off Russia. They have carried on. Zelensky is alive. He has been feted around the world as an incredible political leader. But where do you think Ukrainian public opinion has been moving in recent months? Because I remember we were lucky enough to go to Kyiv a couple of years ago and then again later. And those early visits in that part of the war, there was obviously horror and distress, but what did feel like a real resolve to keep going. But how does it feel now?
If you look at polling, there is still an overwhelming desire for Ukraine to fight for its survival. But President Zelensky's popularity, the willingness to keep fighting from a very high point, as you say, has been in decline for some time. That, alongside the toing and froing of American support, has really rocked the boat in Ukraine having to be consistent against an autocratic Russian regime that has been hell-bent on taking as much Ukrainian territory as possible.
James, thank you very much indeed. We love hearing you at length, which we are allowed to do on Newscast, and we hope to hear you again soon.
Speak soon.
Well, back home to a front line of a different kind, which is families feeling besieged by what their children the harm their children can be exposed to on social media. I feel it's independently fair of me to say you've done a lot of work with families, which has really reduced us to silence, hearing the accounts of parents trying to hope that the lesson of the loss of their child can be put into policy and go into other homes to protect other children.
Yeah, I mean, these are stories that no parent would ever want to tell, and they're stories, frankly, that no reporter would ever want to report on. But our newscasters know very well that a horrible modern trend are parents realising that there were things that their children were being subjected to online or taking part in online that were dangerous, that were sinister, as well as alongside a lot of the fun and good things that technology can bring us. There is this dark side. We've talked a lot about how the government has been grinding its way towards legislation to try to grapple with all of this. But there is a new development where there are a group of 4 British families, 4 British parents, Holly Dance, Lisa Canavan, Ellen Room and Liam Walsh. And they as a group are suing TikTok in America. And in that sense, this is a new development because you have British families seeking redress, also seeking information and the full truth about what happened to their children by using the American courts. Now, their lawsuit claims that their children, Isaac, Archie, Jules, he was known as, and Maya, died while attempting the so-called blackout challenge, one of those challenges on TikToks, which are basically like a sort of 21st century version of dares, dares that can go wrong, hideously wrong in these cases, or dares people might remember the ice bucket challenge, something that looked like it was much more benign and actually was a fun viral craze online. But in these cases, these parents firmly believe that participating in these TikTok challenges are what led to their children's death. And this lawsuit against TikTok that's been filed says that it is dangerous, says that it is addictive, and that its algorithms push dangerous content like pranks to children in a way that is completely unacceptable. And I sat down with the four of them together this morning here at the BBC to hear their stories, and also why they hope that this action might actually be a constructive step to take, not just for them, but also to raise awareness for other families who might find themselves in these kinds of terrible situations. And we can play you a couple of excerpts of the conversation that I had this morning with Holly, Lisa, Ellen and Liam.
Accountability. They need to look at not just us, parents around the world. It's not just in England, it's the US, it's everywhere. And we want TikTok to be forthcoming, wanting to help us. Why hold back from giving us the data? How can they sleep at night?
I've tried various support groups and things before, and it hasn't worked for me. I haven't found it helpful. And actually a friend said to me yesterday, it must be draining, talking to these other parents in the same situation. I went, complete opposite. To pick up the phone, and we've all done it, where we've said, you do have some days that are particularly bad, where it's very difficult to function. And to pick up the phone, or even a nice voice message to say, get it, we're here.
Thank you for bringing that, Laura, to the table, because it's about parents wanting to be heard, and that's what the word media means, isn't it? We're in the middle of the newscaster and the family in grief, and they want it all to mean something. They want action and policies and changes in the home as well as in Parliament.
They all see themselves as they were completely normal parents, ordinary families. They all did the right thing. These weren't kids who had gone off and were doing things terribly in secret. Liam told us powerfully about the moment when Maya came to him and said, "Oh, hey, Dad, can I download TikTok?" They knew what they were checking their kids' phones. They weren't people who were completely ignorant about what was going on. They felt that they had done the right things. And yet these terrible events took place by complete surprise. These were not the parents of children who'd already been very troubled, children who'd already been finding life very, very difficult. They were, in each of these cases, from their parents' testimony, happy-go-lucky kids who were dabbling with having fun online, who they believe came across something that ultimately led to their deaths. Now, as you say, TikTok have said, look, they blocked searches for these kinds of videos back in 2020. TikTok says it prohibits dangerous content or challenges on the platform. But it does feel at the moment, almost on a weekly basis, there are families coming forward saying, look, we've been caught up in the most terrible way in the loopholes that there are around internet safety. These parents, and we're not saying throw all the phones in the sea, turn off the internet. They're not even sure about banning TikTok, which some politicians think should happen, partly for different security reasons. But it's so powerful to listen to them and to hear their stories. And one of the things that they are angry about is they feel they've been forced to try to go to another country, to the United States, to get the answers and the redress that they haven't been able to find in their own country.
Because when you look back, you can go a long way back and see when technology changed. Mm-hmm. So I think it was basically days after the introduction of the first motor vehicle on the road, someone was killed by a motor vehicle. And then there were airplane crashes of commercial airplanes where they put in place protections based on metal fatigue. We began to understand how to save lives in the air. Then there was seatbelt introduction. Then there was smoking harmful or not? Younger newscasters should know that for many years the tobacco industry fought families who said, your cigarettes killed my dad. They went, no, it's healthy. We should all be smoking.
And
here's an
using
advert.
doctors in their advert
Yes.
sometimes.
So what's happening is it looks a great deal like governments and companies are running retrospectively to catch up with the harm that technology can do. That every time we talk about AI, we're wondering about, are we in front of it or behind it? And every time you talk about another family, they're trying to say, look, there weren't the protections in place. Never mind TikTok saying now it's banning searches for the blackout challenge now, but it's about what happened when there wasn't a ban on that challenge. That's the point.
And it's interesting you say this also about that sense of historical comparisons. So Matt Dukes, who's one of the most senior police officers in the land, told one of our journalistic colleagues, told The Times this week, in his view, he thought that social media for kids was like looking at smoking and cancer back in the 50s or 60s. He made that comparison.
Right.
And he said, this is something, it's out there. He's not saying it should all be completely banned, but for children who might be radicalised, young men in particular who might be radicalised, that things that are being pushed to them by algorithms on the internet, you've got one of the country's most senior police officers putting his hand up and saying this is something that we need to confront. And obviously, you know, here at the BBC, we're not expressing views about what the right thing or the wrong thing is to do. But it definitely feels to me in the last couple of years that that position, that sentiment, that argument is taking on more and more power almost as each week goes by.
Yeah, they're removing fact-checking from Facebook. The algorithms are pumping things at millions and millions of people that make them angry, and the angry algorithm is what drives engagement. Mariana Spring, our colleague, does a lot of work on this, and inevitably, every now and again comes a family along that says, well, this is what actually happened, guys. And that's ultimately why I think you're ploughing this furrow dedicatedly, because it keeps happening. We can't just say it's stopped, because it's happening all the time. And that's what, and indeed, younger newscasters, you know, if you're interested in it, we can do an edition. I can play you the ad, because I used to work on this story about tobacco in another era of my life.
What, in the 1950s?
No, in the 1990s, actually, because there were big tobacco cases when I was a business journalist in the States.
Here, of course, we are in this sort of moment of anticipation. So the Online Safety Act was passed in the UK to try to grapple with keeping people safe online, not just kids, but adults as well. It is now a piece of legislation, but the regulator, Ofcom, hasn't finished off yet writing its codes, as they're called, the rules and regulations. There is already, we've talked about it before, you know, there's a lot of kind of disquiet and concern about whether that legislation is already out of date, whether or not it needs to be re-looked at every year. In fact, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said that to us on the show last weekend when we were talking about young men viewing potential sort of terrorist content or violence online. But we're in this sort of wait and see moment. So will the Online Safety Act actually do what it's meant to do in a big picture, keep people safe online, or will it actually already prove to have been out of date? But I think behind, a bit publicly, but a lot privately in government as well, there is an acknowledgement that this legislation is going to have to keep up and keep being reviewed because the technology races ahead and nothing happens very fast in Westminster.
And, I mean, we can check what different jurisdictions do. And in the case that you're mentioning, the attack on a priest was available to view in Australia, was cancelled in Australia. You could not view it anymore in an Australian jurisdiction, whilst it was still able to be viewed here in the United Kingdom.
Well, in Australia is an interesting one because they are banning social media for under 16s. And actually, we've been trying to get the Australian government to come and talk to us about that. So if anybody from the Australian government is listening, we'd be fascinated to hear about it from you. But also any newscasters who might be in Australia or have Australian relatives. It's interesting. They seem to be going further and faster in ways that other countries aren't. Well, the government here always sort of says, oh, well, we're not sure. But the Online Safety Act is a mammoth piece of legislation. It is a big deal that it finally came into force, but we are really much in this sort of anticipating moment as to see how much difference it is going to make. What are you going to do tomorrow?
I'm going to ask, how do we triage Trump? So the most powerful man in the world at the moment says things that are very important, but he says so many things, it's called flooding the zone. Radio 4 listeners are wondering, is it now going to be on Gardener's Question Time? What does the new White House mean for your petunias?
There's a lovely garden in the White House, and Michelle Obama
Yes,
used to
today.
grow vegetables in it.
Right, today on Gardener's Question Time, the garden at the White House. Then what will Donald Trump mean here on Desert Island Discs? What are Donald's favourite Desert Island Discs? So obviously you've got to find a filter. So we're asking two beer moth journalists, Christian Amanpour and Andrew Neil, how do I find out what's important? What's the noise? What's the real? And Lord Darroch, who was the ambassador who Donald Trump wanted to sack.
Because he was very rude about him.
In personal memos, private diplomatic memos, which were leaked. But also, Lord Darroch has said you have to give Donald Trump a chance. He negotiated the Abraham Accords.
In the Middle East.
In the Middle East. And there is substance that we have to pay attention to. So that's one of the subjects.
Got NATO countries to pony up more money on defence by threatening to withdraw American support if they didn't do it.
Took, with the threat of tariffs, took the Mexican president to send more troops or to put together a package that at least sounds like more troops go to the border.
And yet, you're right, it is a huge challenge. So when to pay attention to the Trump megaphone and when to turn it down. That's really interesting. And I will tune in retrospectively tomorrow once I've done my programme with Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm off to go and speak to her shortly about the government's plans for housing and a few other things besides. And obviously, Angela Rayner, in the last couple of days, has made a lot of headlines by her decision that the Grenfell Tower should be taken down. So we will speak to her about that. And we'll have that on BBC One at 9 tomorrow morning. And then we will be reunited on Sunday's newscast tomorrow afternoon.
And I will be watching you retrospectively, of course. That's the advantage of the technology, if you're going to be listening to me. And anyway, enough about us. To you listening, thank you very much. We'll try and bring you the best of Sunday's journalism from the newspapers, our rivals, our friends in other broadcasters, and we'll be reunited on Sunday's newscast.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.